It was a particularly cheerless morning in late October of the year 1893, when I found myself once again ensconced at 221B Baker Street, warmed more by the anticipation of conversation than by the sputtering coal fire in the grate. Outside, the London mist clung to the window panes like a second curtain, and the rattle of a passing hansom cab punctuated the otherwise muffled silence of the city, awakening under a blanket of damp fog. Holmes was already at his usual station, cross-legged in the armchair, dressing gown thrown carelessly about him, pipe clenched between his teeth like a commander pondering the movements of unseen troops. His hawk-like gaze followed the smoke spirals as if they bore secrets. "You are troubled, Watson," he said without shifting his gaze. "Merely contemplative, Holmes. This weather inspires melancholy, and nonsense. You are unsettled because you've read the Times, found no mention of war or scandal, and now fear the world is too calm to be trusted. That, and your tea, is understeeped." I chuckled, setting aside the tepid cup on the side table. "You remain the world's only reliable barometer of excitement. Has a new case arrived?" "As a matter of fact," Holmes replied, gesturing to a single envelope resting on the sideboard, "it has. Delivered by private courier just after dawn, addressed to me in an unfamiliar hand. No return address, no crest, and curiously sealed without wax." I stood and approached the envelope. The parchment was of fine quality, but it bore no seal or adhesive, simply folded and tucked, an antiquated method rarely seen in London, even among the most eccentric gentry. Holmes noticed my hesitation. "Do open it, Watson. Your hands are steadier than mine after 3 bowls of shag." I carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate, each word composed as though the writer feared ambiguity more than haste. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I require your services most urgently. The matter is of grave personal concern, though one of public consequence, if handled poorly. I cannot write more in this medium. You will find me at my residence, Renthorpe House, Richmond Hill, between the hours of 3 and 5 this afternoon. I trust your discretion above all. A friend to no one, but in need of one now." I read it aloud, then looked up at Holmes, a rather melodramatic tone. "Indeed," Holmes said, rising. He paced to the window and gazed out through the mist. "But melodrama is often the theatre of truth. What catches the eye first, Watson? The secrecy, the urgency, and if you'll forgive the flourish, the theatrical signature." "Precisely. And yet," he said, turning sharply, "what is omitted is of greater interest than what is stated. No name, no wax, no trace of postage. The letter was hand-delivered, meaning the writer is either within London or has resources enough to ensure speed. More curiously, the phrase 'a friend to no one' suggests infamy. It hints we are not dealing with a victim of crime, but perhaps a perpetrator seeking protection or absolution." He moved to the fireplace and tapped his pipe against the edge of the mantel. Ash scattered like spent gunpowder. "What does the absence of wax tell us, Watson?" I thought a moment. "It suggests haste, or that the sender wished to avoid leaving any traceable seal." "Or both," Holmes said. "But the lack of even a drop of adhesive tells me something else. The message was never meant to be opened by the uninvited. It was carried with care, not sent through the careless hands of the post." "And yet the courier said nothing?" "He vanished before Mrs. Hudson could inquire. A man in a grey coat," she said. "Bowler hat. A slight limp. That description fits too many Londoners to be useful unless we can attach him to Richmond Hill. Shall we go, then?" "We shall. Richmond Hill by 3 o'clock. Bring your revolver." "My revolver?" Holmes only smiled faintly. "Just in case our friend is more dangerous than desperate." And with that, the day began, though neither of us could yet imagine that the letter, sealed with no wax and almost no information, would lead us into one of the most peculiar mazes of human deception we had ever encountered. The journey to Richmond Hill was undertaken in near silence, the muffled clip of the horse's hooves striking cobblestones like a steady metronome ticking toward the unknown. Holmes sat opposite me in the cab, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze unfocused yet inwardly alive. I knew better than to disturb him during such moments. His mind, though silent, was conducting a thorough autopsy of the scant clues we had. I spent the time reviewing the letter once more, puzzled by its tone and substance, or rather, the lack of both. The mist thickened as we left the city proper, enveloping the countryside like a slow-moving shroud. When at last we reached Richmond Hill, the cab halted in front of a wrought-iron gate bearing no name, no crest, only a simple brass plate with the numerals 17. A narrow gravel path led up to a severe-looking house of red brick, 3 stories tall and square of shoulder, as if it resented the very notion of architectural whimsy. Holmes stepped down first, eyes scanning the upper windows, then the path, then the gatepost. "Recently painted," he muttered, "yet the hinges are rusted. Odd." I followed his gaze and saw what he meant. The gate had clearly been painted within the last week, the brass polished, but the bolts securing it were old and pitted with corrosion. A hasty attempt at disguise? Or mere neglect? Before I could ask, the door of the house opened, and a tall, narrow man in a dark suit emerged. He did not descend the steps but waited, hands clasped before him like a mourner receiving condolences. As we approached, I took in his sallow complexion, the unnaturally jet-black hair parted precisely down the middle, and a face composed with such self-restraint that it bordered on the theatrical. "Mr. Holmes?" he asked in a voice so low it might have been mistaken for a breath. Holmes inclined his head. "And you are?" "My name is Havelock. I am the manservant of the house." "You are expected." He ushered us in without further pleasantries. The interior of Renthorpe House was no less forbidding than its facade: dark oak panels, faded Turkish rugs, and the faint odor of something medicinal clinging to the air. We were led into a drawing room furnished with a frayed settee and 2 wing-back chairs that had seen better decades. A marble clock ticked from the mantel with an insistent click, 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 as if trying to keep time alive in a house where everything else had stopped. Holmes sat without invitation, removing his gloves with exaggerated care. "And your employer?" "Miss Adeline Mortlake will be with you shortly," said Havelock, then paused. "She has not left the house in some time." As the servant withdrew, Holmes's eyes flicked across the room. "What do you observe, Watson?" "The place has not been well kept. Dust in the corners, mildew in the curtain folds. Yet the hearth has been recently swept. It suggests the illusion of order." Holmes smiled faintly. "Just so. And this," he gestured to a bookshelf, a curious collection. Legal digests, naval almanacs, and 3 volumes of Goethe. Not what one would expect from a young woman, unless... He trailed off as the door opened again. A woman entered, no older than 35, though her bearing was that of someone much older. She was plainly dressed in a high-collared gown of deep burgundy, her auburn hair pinned into a severe knot, and her grey eyes met Holmes's with unflinching precision. "You came," she said, as though it surprised her. "I did," Holmes replied, "though I must admit the lack of particulars in your letter would have deterred most men." She moved to the window, drew the heavy curtain aside slightly, then let it fall. "I did not write that letter," she said. Holmes said nothing at first. He simply leaned forward, clasped his hands, and waited. "I found it," she said. "Slipped beneath my bedroom door yesterday morning. No one in the house admits to placing it there. It was sealed, no, folded with my name on it. And yours." "Curious," Holmes murmured. "So you summoned me not out of concern for your own welfare, but because someone else, pretending to be you, invoked my attention." "Exactly. Then the question becomes," Holmes said, "who benefits from bringing me here under false pretenses?" Miss Mortlake hesitated, as though some inner battle were playing out. Then she crossed to the mantel and retrieved something from behind the clock, a small, cloth-bound volume. "This was also left in my room 2 nights ago," she said. "A diary. My late brother's." "Late?" I said. "Then you are Miss Adeline Mortlake, sister of?" "Captain Thaddeus Mortlake, retired from the Royal Navy, found dead in this house 3 weeks ago. A fall down the servants' staircase. It was ruled an accident." "And you do not agree with that ruling?" Holmes said flatly. She gave a tight nod. "Thaddeus was many things. Arrogant, stubborn, secretive. But he was a man of discipline. He did not fall by accident." Holmes took the diary, opening it gently. The pages were neat, entries dated in naval fashion. He scanned one page, then another. Abruptly, his brow furrowed. "Watson," he said, handing me the diary. "Read aloud the entry for September 22nd. I cleared my throat. "Received word by courier message, unmarked, unsigned. Yet, it confirms what I feared. The cipher was broken. Someone knows about Richmond. Must take action before the letter falls into the wrong hands." I looked up. "What cipher? What letter?" "Precisely," Holmes said. "And now the title of our case, The Letter Sealed, with no wax, takes on deeper resonance. Someone is searching for a letter. One of importance. One, I suspect, that has yet to be found." Miss Mortlake sat, suddenly pale. "I believe my brother was killed for that letter, and now someone wants me to find it for them." Holmes rose. "You said something crucial. You said the diary was left in your room, along with the letter summoning me. The implication is undeniable." "What do you mean?" "That your brother's killer is here," Holmes said. "In this house." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock strike 4. Holmes walked slowly to the window, then turned back with an air of grim resolve. "We shall remain, Miss Mortlake. This house has more secrets than rooms, and I intend to uncover them all before the letter finds its way into the wrong hands." Miss Mortlake gave a single nod, but her fingers gripped the armrest of her chair with white-knuckled tension. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the sense that we had stepped not into a case, but into a trap already sprung. Holmes seemed invigorated. "Come, Watson, let us examine the servants' staircase." He didn't wait for agreement, already striding from the room. As I followed, I had the distinct impression that the house was watching us, and that whatever had killed Captain Mortlake was not finished. Yet, the corridor leading to the servants' staircase was narrow and dimly lit, the wallpaper curling in places like peeling bark. A single gas sconce flickered, casting long shadows that bent and trembled with every footfall. Holmes moved ahead with measured silence, his gaze sweeping the skirting boards and ceiling corners, every inch of the space taken in, as though he were reading a complex equation etched in dust and wood grain. At the foot of the stairs, he crouched, fingers brushing the edge of the 3rd step. "Blood," he murmured. "Faint, but unmistakably dried blood. No attempt to scrub it clean." Curious. I leaned closer and saw it. A dark brown smudge, partly concealed by the worn thread of the stair carpet. It was precisely the kind of oversight one would expect in a hurried cleanup, or one meant only to appease superficial scrutiny. "Tell me, Watson," Holmes said without looking up. "How would a naval officer disciplined, sober, and reputedly sound of body come to fall head-first down a staircase known only to the household staff?" I understood his implication. "He wouldn't," I said, "unless he was pushed or led there under false pretenses." "Precisely, and here note this." Holmes had reached the landing halfway up. "The banister is clean, too clean in fact, recent polish, unevenly applied. Notice how the rail gleams only up to a certain point." He pointed to a sharp corner where the polish ceased abruptly, beyond which the wood was dull with dust. Someone cleaned only where a scuffle may have occurred, but they missed the ridge beneath. See here. He pressed his thumb into the underside of the banister, and when he withdrew it, a faint black residue clung to his glove. "Boot polish," I offered. Or more likely graphite, transfer from gloves or a tool, a sign of concealment. Someone stood here, perhaps watching, perhaps waiting. Holmes moved swiftly now, descending the remaining steps to the servants' level, a bare stone corridor lined with cupboards and 2 low doors. He paused at the first, then opened it to reveal a cramped utility space. Dust lay thick upon the floor. Undisturbed, he muttered. No signs of recent passage. The second door opened into what must have been a former scullery. The room bore a different character entirely: scrubbed floorboards, a coal stove long extinguished, and several crates stacked with dusty linens. Holmes's eyes narrowed. He stepped across the threshold, then knelt at one of the crates. "What is it?" I asked, though I could already see he had discovered something unusual. "This cloth is wrong," he said, pulling back a folded sheet to reveal not linen, but stiff paper letters, dozens of them, bound with a faded ribbon. "These are correspondence, all addressed to Captain Mortlake." I took one, noting the fine penmanship and the French stamps. "From Paris," I said, flipping it over, dated July. Holmes's brow furrowed as he flipped through several. "The tone is affectionate. See here, Mon cher Thad," and repeated references to the cipher and to someone named Émile. He fell into silence as he read one more carefully, his eyes scanning faster with every line. "Watson," he said at last, "this changes everything." Captain Mortlake was in possession of a coded document that, it seems, originated from France. These letters refer to it obliquely, always in guarded terms. But there's no mistaking the importance. A political cipher, perhaps, or something military. Either way, it would make him a target for espionage. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Then it wasn't just a family quarrel or a personal vendetta. "No," Holmes said, standing. "This is a much larger game." He returned the letters to the crate, eyes narrowed in thought. And yet why leave these here? Hidden, but not beyond discovery. Someone wanted them found, or perhaps wanted to keep them close. Could Miss Mortlake have known? I doubt it. She struck me as sincere and frightened. No, someone else in this house is aware of these letters. Perhaps even the cipher itself. He straightened his coat and gestured toward the door. "Come, we must speak again with the household." As we emerged into the main corridor, Havelock appeared with ghostly timing, his face unreadable. "Mr. Holmes," he said, bowing slightly, "Miss Mortlake asks if you would join her in the library." "There is another matter." Holmes tilted his head. "Lead on." Library was a gloomier room than I expected. Tall shelves lined the walls, but many were bare, and those that remained were filled with old naval records and manuals, not the well-loved volumes one might expect in a cultivated household. Adeline Mortlake stood near the hearth, a folded piece of paper in her hands, her face paler than when we'd first seen her. I received this," she said without preamble, handing the paper to Holmes. "Just now. It was placed on my writing desk while I was out of the room for scarcely 10 minutes. Holmes opened it carefully. The note was written in the same elegant hand as the earlier letter. "You are searching too closely. The dead buried their secrets. Let them lie, Miss Mortlake. For your own good, and for what remains of your brother's honor." There was no signature, no mark, no indication of origin. But the threat was unmistakable. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "They're growing nervous," he said, more to himself than to us. "The tempo quickens. The killer is close." Adeline sat slowly. "You believe it was murder?" Then, "I believe," Holmes said, "that your brother uncovered something valuable, something dangerous. And now someone is trying to keep you from doing the same." He turned to Havelock, who lingered at the door. "How many servants remain in this house?" "Only myself, sir. And the housekeeper, Mrs. Gidley. Fetch her. I wish to speak with you both." The servant gave a faint nod and disappeared. Holmes turned back to the fireplace. He knelt before the grate, examining the coals, then reached in and withdrew a sliver of charred parchment. He held it up with tweezers, frowning. "What is it?" I asked. "Something burned recently. Too recent to be your brother's doing." He laid the fragment on the desk. What remained of the writing was nearly gone, but I could still discern the tail of a cursive A. And beneath it, a number. 17. "This cipher," Holmes said, standing slowly, "may not be merely a code. It may refer to people, to addresses, or both. And 17, the number of this house, wasn't just coincidence." We heard footsteps approaching, and Havelock returned with a stout, heavy-set woman in a plain grey dress. Her face was ruddy and lined with years of indoor labor, but her expression was wary. "Mrs. Gidley," Holmes said with a courteous nod. "I am Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I wish to ask you both, has anyone left or entered this house unexpectedly in the past week?" "No, sir," said Havelock. "None that I saw," said Mrs. Gidley, though her voice wavered. Holmes's eyes flicked between them. "Very well. Then one of you must explain how 2 letters, a diary, and now a threat have found their way to Miss Mortlake's chamber under your watch." The silence stretched. Havelock's face remained impassive, but the housekeeper shifted, clasping her hands more tightly. Holmes stepped forward, his voice lowering. "Someone in this house knows more than they say. And if they do not speak now, they will answer to the law when I reveal the truth." Mrs. Gidley's mouth opened, but before she could speak, a crash echoed from upstairs. A scream followed. Holmes was already moving, up the staircase like a shot. I followed, revolver in hand. What we found at the top would change the shape of the entire investigation. Someone had broken into Captain Mortlake's study, and the cipher, whatever it was no longer where it had been hidden. We reached the landing as the echoes of the scream still hung in the air like a struck bell. The door to what I presumed was Captain Mortlake's study stood ajar. The wood splintered at the edge where the lock had been forced. Holmes reached it first and flung it open fully, revealing a scene of quiet devastation. The study was in disarray. Papers lay strewn across the floor, drawers had been wrenched open and upturned, and the books on the far shelf, military, treatises, nautical records, and legal volumes, had been pulled half out as if someone had rifled through them in haste. A single desk lamp flickered, casting jerky shadows across the chaos. At the center of the room stood Adeline Mortlake, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other clenched at her side. Behind her, the glass door to the balcony hung open, allowing the damp chill of the fog to seep into the room. I heard the noise from the hall," she stammered, "and came to see, but whoever it was is gone." Holmes was already moving. He crossed to the balcony and stepped out, eyes scanning the grounds below. The wall descended sharply into a garden below, the perimeter bordered by high hedges and iron fencing. He crouched, inspecting the stonework. "Rope fibers," he murmured, plucking a few loose threads from the balustrade. "Frayed. Whoever escaped went down the outer wall. A practiced climber, no doubt." I joined him, peering down into the mist. He couldn't have made it far. "No," Holmes said, standing. "But he had a head start of several minutes and, I suspect, a well-planned exit. This was not a burglary of opportunity. This was surgical." He turned back into the study, his sharp eyes sweeping across the wreckage. "The cipher," Miss Mortlake said quietly. "It was here. I'm sure of it." "Then you'd seen it?" She shook her head. "No. But Thaddeus was obsessed with this room. He always kept it locked. He had a hiding place somewhere only he knew." Holmes began methodically examining the desk, his fingers tapping the underside, then the side panels. At last, he paused at a small wooden inlay near the rear leg. "Watson," he said softly, "bring me the candle from the mantel." I did as he asked. He held the flame close to the panel. A faint outline appeared, a rectangle slightly darker than the surrounding wood. He pressed it, and with a soft click, a narrow drawer slid out from the back of the leg, so skillfully integrated it could have been missed even under close inspection. Inside was only a small leather folder, the contents now conspicuously absent. "Empty," Holmes said. "Our visitor found exactly what he was looking for." Adeline drew in a sharp breath. "So it's true. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting." Holmes turned the folder over. On the inside cover was a small stamp, fleur-de-lis, surrounded by a wreath. He tapped it twice. "French military intelligence," he said. 18th arrondissement, to be precise. Our Captain Mortlake had dealings far beyond what he let on. A knock came at the door, and Havelock reappeared, breathless. "I saw someone in the garden just now moving quickly toward the back gate." Holmes's face darkened. "And you let him escape?" I didn't realize until I heard the scream upstairs." "Never mind," Holmes snapped. "We're past the point of prevention. Now we observe the consequences." He looked to Miss Mortlake. "You must be honest with me. Did your brother ever mention a man named Emile?" She hesitated. "Once. I assumed he was an associate from his naval days." They spoke in French. Sometimes Thaddeus was fluent. He said, "Emile knew what the Admiralty wouldn't admit. But I thought it was just sailors' talk." "Why?" "Because," Holmes said, "whoever broke in here knew precisely where to look. That takes planning. It takes insight. And it almost certainly took someone with access to this house." Her eyes widened. "You mean one of the staff? Or someone using one of them?" At that moment, Mrs. Gidley appeared at the door, her face pale. "Beg pardon, but something's missing from the cellar." Holmes turned. "Go on." "The wine ledger, it's always kept in the small safe in the cellar hall, but it's gone. And the key to the outer gate, the one for the gardener's entrance, that too." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "The gardener? There's a gardener?" "There was. Name of Peter Jowls. But he left the household a month ago. Claimed he was going to join his brother in Portsmouth." "Was anything suspicious about his departure?" "Only that it was sudden. He'd worked for the family for over 5 years without incident." Holmes's lips compressed into a thin line. "Then I suspect this Jowls never left London at all. He may have remained close enough to watch the house and bide his time." I glanced at Holmes. "You think he's Emile?" Holmes shook his head. "No, but I believe he's working for him, or for someone like him." He walked to the shattered desk and began examining a loose sheaf of papers left behind in the ransacked drawer. Most were mundane bills, charts, scribbled notes on supply routes, but one stood out. A receipt, dated 5 weeks earlier, for a shipment delivered to Renthorpe House. "What is it?" I asked. "A consignment of books, all in French. But this," he held up a second slip of paper, a parcel signed for by P. J. Jowls. "It was never meant for Miss Mortlake. The gardener received it directly." "Books?" I said. Holmes nodded. "Or a cover for something else. The cipher may have been hidden within them." He stepped away from the desk and looked at the window. The fog outside was beginning to thin, the sun pressing weakly through the grey veil of the sky. "I must examine that parcel's origin," he said, "and more importantly, we must discover who is orchestrating this operation. Jowls may be a pawn, but the one moving the pieces is far more dangerous." Miss Mortlake stood by the fireplace, arms folded tightly, her face unreadable. "Mr. Holmes, do you believe my brother was a traitor?" Holmes turned to her, and his voice softened. "No. I believe your brother uncovered something someone else would kill to conceal. Whether he sought to expose it or protect it, we must learn before another life is lost." A silence fell between us, heavy with implication. Then Holmes straightened his coat. "Watson, we return to Baker Street. There are threads I must pull quietly and at once. Miss Mortlake, I suggest you remain indoors. Do not respond to any letter, knock, or visitor unless I verify them first. Someone will attempt to silence you. And it is imperative You do not give them the opportunity." She nodded, her jaw tight. Holmes strode toward the hall, the case no longer a puzzle of ink and hidden drawers, but one of international intrigue and mortal danger. And I, ever his companion in storm or stillness, followed him down the stairs with the heavy knowledge that before the cipher was found, someone else might die for it. We returned to Baker Street just as twilight crept across the city, the fog thinning to a silvery mist that clung low over the rooftops like a veil reluctant to lift. Holmes said little during the journey. He kept his gaze fixed beyond the window of the cab, his fingers interlaced, his face carved in that cool mask of concentration I had come to know so well, no flicker of emotion, no wasted movement. To others, it might have appeared as idleness. But I knew better. Holmes was hunting, not with his hands but with his mind, tracing invisible lines from Richmond Hill to the darkened alleys and corridors of European intrigue. As we stepped into our rooms at 221B, Mrs. Hudson appeared with her usual mix of concern and brisk efficiency, announcing the arrival of a telegram in Holmes's absence. He took it silently and tore it open. I watched his eyes flick across the contents, then narrow. He passed it to me without a word. It read, "Mortlake's name registered last year at Hotel Verneuil, Paris. Stayed under alias T. Moran. Associated with known military codsmith, Lestrade. Lestrade's investigation proceeds apace," I said. Mortlake used an alias abroad. Moran, interesting choice of name. Indeed. Holmes murmured, a choice that may be more deliberate than convenient. And Paris again, always Paris. He turned, walking to his desk and clearing a space amid the usual clutter of tobacco tins and chemical vials. From the inner pocket of his coat he withdrew the charred parchment fragment we had recovered from the fireplace at Renthorpe House and laid it beside the leather folder. He examined them both anew under a magnifying lens, his brows furrowing. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. He tapped the inside of the folder. The fleur-de-lis stamp. It's genuine, yes, but over-inked, blurred at the edges. A poor imprint for a military office known for precision. As for this charred parchment, he held it up to the light. The sliver of cursive R was clearer now, and the number below 17 seemed part of a larger sequence, though most of it had been consumed by the fire. "It's not a name," Holmes said suddenly. "It's a designation. A numbered list, perhaps, or part of a ledger. I considered this the wine ledger." Holmes shook his head. "Too obvious. No, something older. Something more valuable." He stepped away from the table and paced toward the bookshelf. From a high shelf, he pulled a volume of Bradshaw's Continental Guide, one of his least used references, and began thumbing rapidly through its pages until he stopped. "Watson," he said, tapping the entry with a fingertip. "Here is Hotel Verneuil, a quiet location known for discretion, popular with military retirees and the occasional political exile. But what's interesting is that it houses a private reading room operated by a former French intelligence officer named Renaud Armand. Retired, on paper, but I suspect he still plays a part." He dropped the book and turned sharply. "We must write to Armand. No, better yet, we send a message through Mycroft. He'll reach Renaud in a matter of hours." Holmes sat at once, scrawling a note with brisk, mechanical speed, sealed it in an envelope, and passed it to me. "Take this to the Diogenes Club. Mycroft will know what to do. Have it marked eyes only. And hurry. Every hour lost strengthens the hand of whoever holds the cipher." I did as instructed, weaving through the dusk of Baker Street, the gas lamps flickering above the damp flagstones, the urgency of the mission beating in my chest like a second pulse. Within half an hour I returned, breathless and a little chilled. Holmes had not moved from his chair. He looked up. "Delivered?" "Yes." Mycroft's page took it without question. "Good." He leaned back and steepled his fingers again. "Now we wait. In the meantime." He rose suddenly and crossed to the fireplace. From behind the Persian screen he withdrew a narrow wooden box, no larger than a loaf of bread. He placed it on the table with care, then opened it. Inside were several neatly folded newspaper clippings, all from French publications. One bore the headline, Déclaration du ministre, documents disparus. Another, subtler piece mentioned an unusual theft from the diplomatic archives and speculated about a coded letter believed to have gone missing. Holmes tapped the article. I acquired this from an informant several months ago. At the time, I assumed it was connected to a separate affair. But now, he stood slowly. Watson, I believe Captain Mortlake intercepted a message, one not meant for English eyes. A cipher embedded within military dispatches. French command wanted it buried, Mortlake wanted it exposed, and someone clever wanted it back. But who? Holmes gave me a long look. We have only two viable suspects within reach, Havelock and Mrs. Gidley. Both had access. Both are unaccounted for at key moments, but their motives are unclear. As if on cue, a soft rap came at the door. Holmes opened it to reveal a familiar figure. Inspector Lestrade. Evening, Holmes, Lestrade said, removing his hat. Just got off the train from Richmond. Thought you'd want to hear this in person. Come in, Lestrade. Sit. What have you found? Lestrade handed him a folded report. Checked Mortlake's background again. Turns out he wasn't just retired. He was dismissed quietly. Something about inappropriate communications with foreign agents. Records sealed by the Admiralty. Smells political. Holmes scanned the report and nodded grimly. And Jowls? Gone, Lestrade said. Disappeared 3 weeks before Mortlake's death. No trace in Portsmouth. But get this, we've got a match on the handwriting from the anonymous letters. It belonged to a man called Vasseur. Jules Vasseur, French national, codebreaker turned private agent, once arrested for selling secrets to the highest bidder. Vasseur, Holmes repeated slowly. So he is in London. Or was, Lestrade said. His known residence near Lambeth was torched last night. Clean job, no bodies, no clues. Holmes stood perfectly still. Then we are very near the truth, and very near danger. Someone is eliminating the trail as we speak. He turned to the window and peered out into the black veil of night. Watson, tomorrow we return to Renthorpe House. I must search Captain Mortlake's quarters again, this time not for what was taken, but for what was meant to be found. There is always something left behind. And the cipher? I asked. It exists, Holmes said, but it's not on paper anymore. Not entirely. No, Mortlake was too careful. The real key, I suspect, is not what he wrote, but who he spoke to. And someone in that house heard more than they were meant to. He turned to Lestrade. You must post a constable at Renthorpe, discreet but armed. Whoever killed Mortlake is not done. And, if I am correct, the next move will be to silence Miss Mortlake before she remembers too much. Holmes paced to Rend, the hearth, firelight catching the edge of his profile. Letters sealed with no wax, names erased, a cipher that changed hands not once, but 3 times, and a sister who trusts in her brother's honor. There is only one truth left to uncover. He turned to me, eyes alight with fierce resolve. And tomorrow, Watson, we shall uncover it. We returned to Renthorpe House the following morning, the mist rising reluctantly from the earth like a ghost summoned too early. The sun had emerged pale and uncommitted, casting a thin sheen of light over the gravel drive as our cab pulled to a halt. Holmes stepped down first, already scanning the house as though it might offer some subtle admission of guilt. Constable Merrick, stationed discreetly near the side garden gate, tipped his hat as we passed. Lestrade had acted promptly. His man stood alert, out of sight from the main road, but clearly instructed to observe every window and visitor. Inside, the air was as heavy and quiet as we had left it. Miss Mortlake met us in the drawing-room. Her expression bore the remnants of a sleepless night, and the slight tremble in her hand as she offered Holmes a cup of tea did not go unnoticed. "There have been no further incidents," she said, "though I cannot shake the feeling that someone is still watching." "You are not wrong," Holmes replied calmly, "but we are closer than they think. Before this day ends, I intend to flush them into the light." He turned to me. "Come, Watson. We begin in the captain's quarters. This time, no surface shall go unexamined." The late Captain Mortlake's room lay on the second floor, adjacent to the study, and bore the austere hallmarks of military life. The bed was tightly made, the wardrobe minimally stocked. A heavy desk stood under the window, its drawers locked when we first attempted them, but now left open and already searched. Holmes, however, ignored the desk entirely. Instead, he moved to the fireplace, tapping lightly at the stonework, then to the baseboards. Then, rather abruptly, he dropped to one knee and pried loose the corner of the carpet. "Look here, Watson," he said. Beneath the edge of the rug was a wooden floorboard whose grain ran slightly counter to the others. It bore tiny scratches at the edges, as though lifted many times. Holmes took out his blade and gently pried it up. Beneath lay a narrow cavity. Within it, wrapped in oilskin and tied with a string, was a slender wooden cylinder no longer than a pen. Holmes opened it, and out slid a roll of thin parchment. He unrolled it carefully across the bedspread. It was covered in numbers, rows upon rows of 2- and 3-digit figures arranged into columns. Each was meticulously inked in a hand I recognized from the diary entries. "A Vigenère cipher," Holmes murmured, "but incomplete. See here missing portions, torn, perhaps deliberately." "Could this be what the intruder stole?" I asked. "No," Holmes said. "This was too well hidden. No one without prior knowledge would have thought to lift this floorboard. The thief in the study searched for something else, perhaps the decoded message itself. This, however, is the key." He stepped back, deep in thought. "Watson, if Mortlake intended to protect the cipher, he must have left its companion piece somewhere equally well concealed, but not necessarily in this house." Holmes returned to the study, moving now with a kind of controlled urgency. He scanned the bookshelf again, ignoring the volumes disrupted by the previous search, and instead focusing on those left undisturbed. "These," he said, pulling down a thick book of naval codes. "The spine has not been cracked, yet Mortlake marked the margins in ink look." He opened the book, revealing tiny pencil strokes at seemingly random pages. "These are not notes on strategy. They're references, possibly to the cipher key itself." He laid the book beside the parchment. "Each mark may correspond to a number, a code within a code." I studied the open pages, baffled by the complexity. "But why go to such lengths?" Holmes's expression darkened. "Because what he was protecting was not merely military. This cipher isn't about ship movements or troop counts. It's personal and dangerous, enough to cost him his life." At that moment, footsteps echoed up the stairs. Miss Mortlake appeared at the threshold, eyes wide. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He claims to be from the Foreign Office." Holmes and I exchanged a glance. He moved swiftly to the landing and descended. In the front hall stood a man in a long grey coat, impeccably dressed, bearing the faint smell of tobacco and the confidence of one unaccustomed to being questioned. "Mr. Holmes," he said, offering a curt nod. "My name is Alton Reeves. I represent the Foreign Liaison Division." "Your credentials?" Holmes asked sharply. Reeves produced a leather case and flipped it open. Holmes barely glanced at the card before nodding. "I presume you've come for the cipher." Reeves blinked. "Then you have it?" "No, but I have its companion," Holmes said smoothly. "And I do not intend to hand it over without a satisfactory explanation of your department's interest." Reeves hesitated. "That information is classified." Holmes smiled. "Then I suggest you classify your visit as premature." Reeves's jaw tightened. Captain Mortlake was involved in sensitive correspondence with a former code analyst Vasseur, whose activities were being monitored. The document he acquired contains references to communications between members of our own War Office and foreign intermediaries. Its exposure would be catastrophic. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Then it contains proof of internal betrayal. Reeves didn't answer. Your silence confirms it, Holmes said. So tell me, was Mortlake acting alone, or was he trying to expose someone? Reeves spoke slowly. We believe Mortlake intended to trade the cipher for protection. He feared for his life. He may have reached out to multiple parties, including foreign agents. Holmes turned to me. Which explains the appearance of Jules Vasseur. He was meant to be the courier, but something went wrong. Reeves inclined his head. Yes, and now we need that cipher before it falls into the wrong hands. I suggest, Holmes said coldly, that if you truly wish to retrieve it, you should keep a closer watch on your own house. Someone from the inside already tried to retrieve it under cover of night. Reeves stiffened. Then I trust you'll inform me when it's recovered. I'll do more than that, Holmes said. I'll see to it that it never again becomes a bargaining chip for murder. Reeves left without another word. When the door shut behind him, Holmes turned to Miss Mortlake, who had been listening from the stairs. Your brother, he said gently, was not a traitor. He was a man caught in a very dangerous game, and he may have chosen to hold the cipher as leverage against people who could not afford exposure. She exhaled shakily. Then he died. Protecting something? Holmes nodded. Or trying to use it too late. But his killer still believes there's more to find. He turned to me. We must finish deciphering Mortlake's code, and we must do it quickly. Someone will come again, and next time, they won't leave empty-handed. The room fell silent, the air heavy with impending reckoning, and outside, the fog was lifting. Holmes wasted no time. The moment Reeves had departed, he motioned for me to join him in the study, the cipher key and the annotated naval codebook in hand. He spread both out on the desk, his brow creased in intense concentration. I could sense the pace of his thoughts, the calculations and connections whirring beneath that calm exterior. He handed me a slip of paper and gestured for me to copy down the first column of numbers from the cipher parchment. As I worked, he thumbed quickly through the codebook, pausing at each penciled mark and jotting down the page, line, and word numbers indicated by Mortlake's system. Each reference was cryptic but precise. A pattern slowly emerged, as if the late captain had foreseen the need for Holmes's particular skill to bring meaning to his work. Holmes spoke as he worked, his voice low and urgent. Notice, Watson, that each penciled mark is next to a line containing an unusual word, almost always a place or a date. These aren't annotations for study. They're cues. Fragments intended for assembly. He pointed to one entry. Here Dover, and here Calais. A crossing. And beside them June 17, July 4, smuggling dates or meetings. I finished my column and handed him the list. Holmes quickly began to transpose the numbers to letters, aligning them with the word locations in the codebook. Captain Mortlake intended us to reconstruct a message, using the naval manual as the key. We may yet discover what he risked everything to protect. The process was painstaking. Hours seemed to slip away in silence, broken only by the scratching of Holmes's pen and the slow ticking of the marble clock on the mantel. Miss Mortlake hovered in the doorway, her face drawn but intent, unwilling to leave the sanctuary of the study until she knew what secrets had taken her brother's life. At last, Holmes sat back, the first lines of the decoded message scrawled before him. He read aloud, his voice measured. Danger within the War Office. Vasseur courier for traitor within. Evidence hidden. Richmond cipher not complete. Seek Renault. If I fall, warn A.M. Trust no one. He fell silent. A.M. Adeline Mortlake. He meant for you to receive this warning. Miss Mortlake pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. So he knew someone was betraying England from inside. The government? More than that. He knew who to fear. and whom not to trust. And he tried to get this evidence to Renaud Armand in Paris, but never managed to finish. Holmes considered the next portion, scanning further. The message is fragmented. Here, Red House Garden root cellar, and then several more scrambled numbers. Not enough to complete the location, but enough to direct us. I frowned. Red House? There's no such place at Wrenthorpe, is there? Miss Mortlake's brow furrowed. Not exactly, but the gardener's old cottage at the edge of the property has always been called the Red House by the staff, for its brickwork. The root cellar is beneath it. Holmes's eyes flashed. Then that is where the remainder of the evidence, and perhaps the final cipher, lies. Watson, we must move quickly. He rose, gathering the papers, and led the way through the halls and out across the grounds. The day had grown bright, the fog at last swept away by a cool breeze. The Red House stood apart from the main estate, its red brick walls vivid against the green and grey of the garden beyond. As we approached, Holmes slowed, scanning the earth around the door. Look here, recent footprints, larger than Miss Mortlake's or the housekeeper's. A man, wearing boots, and in a hurry. He turned the handle and found it unlocked. The cottage was cold and bare inside, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. Holmes moved directly to a narrow trapdoor near the fireplace, its hinges old but recently oiled. He knelt, tested the lock, and found it secured with a fresh padlock. Watson, the key. I produced my small case, and Holmes made quick work of the lock with a pair of slender tools. The padlock fell open, and together we lifted the heavy door. The cellar beneath was little more than a shallow pit, lined with stones. At the far end, behind a stack of empty crates, Holmes reached into the darkness and withdrew a small metal box. He pried open the lid with a flat blade. Inside was a second roll of parchment and a bundle of folded letters, each bearing the same French stamp and the cryptic signature A. Holmes smiled grimly. We have it. The second half of the cipher, and the full record of Mortlake's correspondence with Vasseur, and I believe, the identity of the traitor within the War Office. At that moment, a voice rang out from above. Stay where you are. We looked up to see Havelock, the manservant, standing at the top of the stairs, a revolver trained on us. His face, always so composed, was twisted now in desperate fury. Hand me the box, Holmes. I warn you I won't ask twice. Holmes did not flinch. You have gone far enough, Havelock. Is it for France, or for yourself? For England, you fool. Havelock spat. To keep her secrets out of foreign hands. Mortlake was going to sell us all for his own safety. Vasseur offered him a fortune. That's a lie. My brother would never— Your brother lost his nerve. Havelock snarled. He sent word to both sides. He didn't care who bought his life. Holmes's voice was ice. And so you killed him. Havelock hesitated, his hand trembling. He left me no choice. He was weak. The War Office would have paid, but not soon enough. Vasseur came first. I watched Holmes, waiting for his move. Holmes's voice, low and sharp. You will lower that revolver, Havelock, and surrender yourself to the constable outside, or you will leave here in chains, if not worse. Havelock's hand shook. Indecision, warring with fear and anger. For a moment, I thought he might pull the trigger, but a cry sounded from the garden, and Lestrade and Merrick burst in, revolvers drawn. Havelock dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. Holmes turned to me, his expression a mixture of triumph and sorrow. You see, Watson, the end was never about a letter sealed with wax or not. It was always about the hands that shaped the seal and the motives behind them. He handed me the box, its secrets at last laid bare. As Lestrade led Havelock away, the wind stirred the garden, and somewhere overhead, the sun broke free. As Havelock was marched away by Lestrade and the constable, his shoulders bowed and face drawn tight with the desperate defiance of a man who has seen every calculation fail, a hush settled over the Red House. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The metal box, cool and heavy in my hand, seemed to hum with all the secrets it had been made to contain. Miss Mortlake, her composure at last broken by the violence and revelation, leaned against the doorframe, breathing deeply, as Holmes carefully reassembled the ciphers and letters upon a battered table. He laid the roll of parchment from the captain's floorboard beside the newly discovered second piece. His fingers deft and sure as a surgeon's. Each document, each faint mark, now took on a new, luminous significance. "Let us see, Watson," Holmes said quietly, "if the whole story is here." With his characteristic economy, Holmes began the process of matching the two ciphers, consulting the annotated codebook and Captain Mortlake's diary. The numbers and notations, so bewildering in isolation, now revealed their order. A final message, assembled from fear and hope, written for the only person Mortlake had trusted in the end, his sister. As Holmes read aloud, the true shape of the plot unfurled before us. To A. M. I am hunted. Vasseur and Havelock conspire. Havelock is not as he appears. He serves not England nor France, but himself. Vasseur delivers threats, but Havelock acts. There is a traitor at the War Office, unnamed, whom Havelock shields for payment. This evidence will destroy them if it reaches Renaud Armande, Paris. If I do not survive, trust only Armande. Tell Holmes' cipher hidden as code. Letters as proof. May this clear my name. The message ended. Abruptly, but the implications were unmistakable. Miss Mortlake's lips trembled as Holmes handed her the diary. Your brother was no traitor. He tried, desperately, to do the right thing, caught between the malice of others and the silence of those too frightened to speak. She wiped her eyes, voice trembling but strong. Then Havelock, he murdered Thaddeus because he feared discovery? Exactly, Holmes replied, his voice gentle. Havelock intended to use the cipher and the letters as a shield, a means of controlling or extorting the very people whose secrets he kept. He orchestrated Mortlake's death to silence him, then waited for the opportunity to recover every incriminating scrap. Vasseur was only the broker, Havelock was the hand. She looked away, her jaw set. I only wish Thaddeus had trusted me sooner. Holmes rested a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. He did, in the only way he knew. He left you the means to defend his honor and see justice done. We brought the evidence letters, cipher, and Mortlake's own message back to the main house. There, Lestrade took charge of Havelock, who remained tight-lipped as the weight of Holmes's logic closed in about him. Inspector Lestrade, more grave than usual, accepted Holmes's notes and the correspondence with an unspoken gratitude. Without your intervention, Holmes, he said, we'd have been left chasing shadows, and the War Office might never have faced its own corruption. Holmes only shrugged, though I saw a glint of something fierce in his eyes. This business is not concluded yet, Lestrade. There remains the question of the traitor inside the War Office. Havelock's silence is not loyalty, but self-preservation. There are names in these letters, some veiled, others plain enough. Renaud Armand in Paris must receive the originals. Only he can pressure the right hands across the channel to force an investigation on both sides. Lestrade nodded, tucking the cipher away as evidence and signaling Merrick to keep guard over Havelock. I'll telegraph the Yard and see that these reach Whitehall, then Paris. And Miss Mortlake? Holmes turned to Adeline. Miss Mortlake will be under my protection, at least until I am certain no further danger dogs her steps. She is to be commended for her courage and for the loyalty she showed, even when every appearance was against her brother. She managed a faint smile. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Thank you both. We spent that afternoon in quiet, dogged work. Holmes, Lestrade, and I reviewed each letter and note, extracting from Mortlake's precise prose the chronology of events. The pattern that emerged was chilling. Mortlake, dismissed on suspicion but never formally charged, had stumbled onto a string of illicit communications interceptions from both French and English agents, all funneled through the supposed safety of Renthorpe House. His only real crime had been a doomed attempt at leverage, not for greed, but for the hope of exoneration and safety. Vasseur, the elusive French broker, had engineered the first approach, threatening, cajoling, offering impossible bargains. Havelock, ambitious and embittered by long service in the shadows, found in this chaos his chance. Kill Mortlake, recover the evidence, and then sell silence to the highest bidder. As dusk fell, Holmes sat quietly with Miss Mortlake in the now liberated study, offering comfort not in words, but in presence. The events of the past days had aged her, and yet she seemed lighter, relieved of the weight of suspicion. Before we departed for Baker Street, Holmes made a final survey of the grounds with Lestrade. The Red House stood silent, its secrets revealed. The mist that had haunted Richmond Hill had finally lifted, and in the pale gold of sunset I saw Holmes silhouetted in the garden, a lone figure between the worlds of order and chaos. In the cab, as London's lamps flickered, awake, Holmes at last spoke. "You see, Watson, there are times when evil wears no foreign uniform and uses no secret ink. Sometimes it is the old friend, the trusted servant, or the voice that assures us all is well while quietly unmaking the bonds that hold civilized life together." I nodded, recalling the faces of Renthorpe House, their wariness, their secrets, their fear. "And what of the traitor in the War Office?" I asked. Holmes smiled faintly. "That, my dear Watson, is a puzzle for another day. But rest assured, now that the cipher is in the right hands, the truth will not stay hidden forever." The case of the letter sealed with no wax faded into memory, a memory not of shadows, but of the first hard gleam of justice rising over Richmond Hill. The cab rolled steadily through the lamplit streets of London, and I found myself absorbed by the play of shifting shadows and golden gaslight across Holmes's sharp profile. He remained silent, gazing from the window as if reading secrets in the city's murk. I sensed a restless energy within him, the kind that never fully dissipated, even when a case was closed in the eyes of the law. At Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson greeted us with relief, bustling about with the restorative offers of tea and supper. Holmes accepted little, pacing instead by the fireplace, the faint glow casting flickering patterns on his thoughtful face. I set about writing my notes, eager to commit the sequence of events to paper while they were yet fresh. The complexity of the Mortlake affair unfolded in my memory. The cryptic letter, the odd manner of delivery, the house haunted by secrets, and the gradual unmasking of motives more tangled than any web I had previously observed. Even now, I felt there were questions that trailed behind us like unseen threads. Holmes, sensing my absorption, finally broke the silence. "You are wondering, Watson, whether justice is truly served, when so many names remain unspoken, so many secrets carefully veiled." I looked up. "It is difficult not to. Mortlake is exonerated in the eyes of those who matter, but the true architect of the treason remains free within the War Office. Havelock will stand trial, but what of Vasseur and the unknown traitor?" Holmes nodded, the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "It is often a negotiation, a lever applied at precisely the right moment, in precisely the right hands. But do not doubt, the War Office will have no choice but to act now that Renaud Armand has the cipher and the evidence." He paused, picking up Mortlake's diary from the side table, turning it over in his hands. "I have sent a copy of our decoded message to Mycroft. There will be inquiries. Quiet, relentless, and likely never public. The true traitor, I suspect, will slip quietly from sight, an early retirement, a post abroad. Perhaps a quiet death. The world will never know his name. But the danger he posed will be ended." I reflected on this. Is that enough? It is reality, Watson, and sometimes that must suffice. The following days passed in a blur of cautious routine. Lestrade sent word that Havelock, when confronted with the cipher and Mortlake's testimony, confessed his involvement in the murder, though he insisted right to the end that it was patriotism, not greed, that drove him. The press, sensing only a faint scent of scandal, soon lost interest in what seemed, outwardly, a case of private tragedy. Miss Mortlake left Renthorpe House for a relative's estate in Sussex. Grateful yet subdued, her brother's reputation restored, but her family changed forever. Holmes, for his part, received a formal note of thanks from the Foreign Office, coldly worded and unsigned. He glanced at it once and set it aside without comment. But it was on a damp evening several weeks later, as autumn deepened into the sharper edge of winter, that the final ripple of the affair returned to Baker Street. Holmes and I were at our ease after supper, he with his pipe, I with a new medical journal, when a knock came at the door. A boy in the livery of a foreign embassy presented a sealed envelope marked with an elaborate crest. Holmes broke the seal and read the note within, his expression unreadable. "Well," I ventured. He handed me the letter. It was from Renaud Armand in Paris. "My dear Mr. Holmes, the cipher and evidence you forwarded have done their work. The traitor you suspected has been quietly removed. The cooperation between our offices, though never official, has restored a measure of trust and avoided a greater calamity. Miss Mortlake's name and that of her late brother are secure. Should your travels bring you to Paris, my door remains open. Respectfully, Renaud Armand first handed the note back, feeling the curious blend of relief and melancholy that often followed our more tangled adventures. Holmes tapped out his pipe, eyes crinkling with the smallest of smiles. "There, Watson. Our story ends as it began, in secrecy, but not in futility. We have not unmade the world's shadows, but we have drawn them back from one honest soul." The words settled gently, and in the quiet, I reflected on the peculiar solace that came from such moments. There would be other cases, other shadows, but for now the darkness had been met, and, if not dispelled, at least made known. Holmes, true to form, would not dwell on triumph. He soon shifted the conversation to other matters. A curious theft in Soho, a puzzling note from Scotland Yard, the latest exploits of the criminal classes. But as I set down my pen that night, it was the memory of a letter sealed with no wax, and the loyalty it had protected, that lingered longest in my thoughts. For in the end, I understood, there are truths in this world which must be carried not on parchment, nor hidden in cipher, but guarded quietly in the heart, where even the keenest detective's eye can only ever guess their measure. The fire in our Baker Street hearth burned low, casting a mellow glow that flickered over Holmes's violin as it lay, untouched, upon the window-sill. The night was unusually quiet. Even the distant rumble of cabs along Oxford Street seemed to recede, replaced by a hush that only London, in her more contemplative moods, could produce. Holmes, his chair drawn close to the coals, sat with hands tented and gaze distant, though I could tell his mind remained fixed on the strange and twisting course of the Mortlake affair. For some time, neither of us spoke. I had finished writing the final lines of my account, uncertain if I had done justice to the subtle layers of deception, sacrifice, and tragic loyalty that had defined the case. My thoughts wandered to Miss Mortlake, now safely removed to Sussex, and to the late captain, his faults, his secrecy, and the costly honesty he had displayed at the last. Outside, a light rain began to patter at the panes, mingling with the soft crackle of burning ash. It was Holmes who finally disturbed the quiet, his tone softer than usual, contemplative. "You see, Watson, it is the nature of certain secrets never to be shouted from rooftops, but only to be entrusted, quietly, from one trembling hand to another. The business with Mortlake was never about grand conspiracy in the way the world likes to imagine, but about the quiet intersections of trust, fear, and the desperate acts that follow." I nodded, turning the thought over. "You believe, then, that all these great intrigues begin as small betrayals of trust? Almost invariably, the The state can never be more secure than the integrity of those who serve it. Mortlake's story was the story of a man who, frightened and alone, sought to do right as best he could, even as the shadows closed around him. And sometimes the shadows are cast not by foreign foes, but by the trembling hand of a friend or the silence of an ally. He paused, reaching for the diary that now rested on the mantel. What set this case apart, Watson, was not the cipher, nor the international implications, but the simple humanity at its core. Havelock betrayed for fear and self-preservation, Vasseur for profit. But Mortlake risked all for his sister's trust. It is that thread, so often unseen, that binds together the meaning in such affairs. I considered this as the fire dwindled. And what of the traitor still unnamed, the War Office official whom Armande alluded to in his letter? Is there no justice for such a man? Holmes's lips twitched, but there was no mirth in his expression. Justice, in its purest sense, is a rare visitor in the halls of power. The evidence we provided will be enough to ensure his removal, perhaps disgrace, though not the sort of trial or exposure one might wish. Yet, his power will be broken, and the danger past. That I am content to accept for now. A knock sounded below, and Mrs. Hudson's voice drifted up, inquiring if we required anything further. Holmes called back a gentle refusal, and silence resumed its reign. I poured myself another cup of tea, and watched Holmes as he rose and moved to the window, peering out at the slick, rain-washed street. Do you ever regret, Holmes, that so much of your work ends in secrecy? That the world will never know how close it comes to disaster, or how often it is preserved by a letter, a whisper, or a well-timed act of conscience? Holmes considered this, then shook his head. No, Watson, our reward is not public acclaim, but the knowledge that a grave wrong was righted. If the world sleeps easier, unaware, it is thanks enough. Besides, as you yourself so ably record, the truth survives somewhere, if only in the notes of an old friend. A smile finally touched his lips, fleeting but genuine. It is perhaps better that some stories are told only in drawing rooms, over firelight, when the world's noise has faded. There, the measure of what is lost and what is saved becomes clear. I could not disagree. The truth of the Mortlake case, and the part we had played, would never ring from the morning headlines, but it would linger, quietly, in the memory of those who mattered, and perhaps in the hearts of others whose names we would never know. As Holmes returned to his seat and the fire faded to embers, I sensed in him the rare peace that only comes at the end of a storm, a knowledge, hard-earned and well-kept, that some battles are best won in silence. So the case of the letter, sealed with no wax, closed as it had begun, with a knock at the door, a secret between friends, and the rain tapping softly at the windows of Baker Street. Outside, the rain grew steadier, washing the city in silver ribbons that blurred lamp glow into a gentle haze. Holmes, standing at the window, watched the world pass in hushed anonymity. The ordinary life of London pedestrians hurrying under umbrellas, a hansome's hoofbeats muffled by wet stone, was as unremarkable as ever. But in our rooms, the air seemed charged by the memory of what had passed and what remained hidden beneath the city's surface. I felt the weight of the completed case lingering not in satisfaction, but in quiet reflection. Some mysteries, I realized, did not end with a triumphant revelation or dramatic arrest, but in the slow and difficult restoration of order, and in the burdens left behind for those who survived. Holmes turned from the window at last, his silhouette framed by the pale glow outside. You see, Watson, the world often imagines crime as a thing apart, a shadow lurking in back alleys or among the desperate. Yet in truth, it is woven through the very fabric of society, silent and insidious. The Mortlake affair was a knot in that fabric, made visible only for a moment before the threads were woven over again. He crossed to the hearth and placed another log upon the fire, sending a brief flare of light and warmth through the sitting room. The gesture was companionable, almost reassuring, and I realized anew the rare comfort of these quiet hours between us. Holmes, for all his genius, was seldom so at ease as when the world was reduced to the gentle company of friendship and reflection. A faint rapping came at the front door below a late visitor, the kind who often arrived at such an hour in our peculiar profession. "Mrs." Hudson answered, and after a muted exchange, her steps ascended the stairs. She entered with a card upon a tray. Holmes accepted it, eyes narrowing with interest as he examined the engraving. Baron Ferrand de Saint-Laurent, attaché to the French embassy. He read aloud, arching an eyebrow in my direction. "Well, Holmes, it seems your work is never quite complete," I observed with a rueful smile. He gave a slight shrug, lips pursed. "It is often so, Watson. Even in the aftermath of victory, the ripples of one intrigue may stir the waters for another." He invited the visitor up, and soon the Baron himself entered, an elegant, silver-haired gentleman, his bearing marked by a restrained gravity. He bowed to us both and took the seat Holmes offered. "Forgive the lateness of my call," he began, his English careful but fluent, "but I come on behalf of Renaud Armande, who has asked me to express both gratitude and concern." Holmes inclined his head, his keen gaze missing nothing. "I presume the matter is not yet entirely at rest." The Baron sighed, folding his hands. "Indeed, while the cipher you provided has enabled certain corrective actions, it appears a remnant of the Mortlake correspondence remains unaccounted for. A single letter, referenced in both your summary and the diary. Armande fears it is still in circulation. We have reason to believe Vasseur, though disappeared, had a duplicate made, one containing names of operatives, both French and English, whose exposure would undo all that has been achieved." Holmes grew still, his features sharpening with a renewed focus. "And you hope I might assist in recovering it?" "If you are willing, monsieur. Armande has every confidence in your methods, and it is feared the letter may surface in London before long, perhaps offered to the highest bidder, or used as leverage by those who escaped initial suspicion." Holmes tapped his fingers lightly upon his chair, considering. "I will need every detail you can supply: the nature of the letter, its likely contacts, and any known movements of Vasseur's former associates." The Baron nodded. "I have brought what intelligence we possess, and will remain at your disposal. Time is short, I fear. Already there are rumors among certain circles of the final piece to the Mortlake affair, rumors that threaten not only agents, but the fragile trust so recently restored." Holmes's expression softened just slightly as he glanced at me. "Watson, it seems our rest must be brief. We are not yet finished with shadows, nor with the lingering consequences of a single, unsealed letter." I straightened, caught in the familiar swell of anticipation that always preceded the chase. The fatigue and melancholy of resolution gave way to that old quickening, as if, in the very act of rising to the challenge, the world itself became sharper, more alive. The Baron left us with a portfolio of notes and quietly urgent thanks. When the door had closed, Holmes turned to the mantel and poured 2 glasses of the port Lestrade had sent in gratitude. He handed one to me. "A toast, Watson. To unfinished business, and to the knowledge that the truth, however deep it may be buried, always leaves its trace." We drank, the taste lingering on the tongue, the unspoken promise of new pursuit threading through the hush. And so, with rain still soft against the glass, and the city quietly waiting, the case of the letter sealed with no wax entered its final act, not a conclusion, but a beginning. As all true mysteries must, for in Holmes's world, as in life, every ending carries within it the shadow of a new riddle, waiting in the rain. Holmes spent the remainder of the evening poring over the Baron's portfolio, his sharp eyes scanning every document, note, and coded message with a precision I had learned to trust more than any official assurance. I watched him from my armchair. The flicker of the lamp, lending an air of intensity to his already keen features. The sense of closure I'd felt hours before was gone, replaced by the restless current of a case unfinished one, where the boundary between past and present remained uncertain, and the cost of a single misplaced letter could still ripple outward with devastating effect. When at last Holmes spoke, it was with the air of a man who had, if not all the answers, at least the thread that would lead to them. Watson, note this. In Renaud Armand's correspondence, there is reference to a carte blanche, not a document, but a phrase often used in French circles to mean absolute authority. But see here. In Vasseur's own hand, la dernière carte, the last card, I believe the missing letter is more than evidence. It is the lever, the guarantee that whoever possesses it may dictate terms to both sides. He stood, restless, and paced to the window, where rain still traced uncertain lines down the glass. It is a dangerous thing, Watson, when the safety of many depends upon the secrecy of a few. If this letter were to fall into unscrupulous hands, the events at Renthorpe would seem but a prologue. We reviewed the dossier together. There were names and faces, half real, half shadow. Intermediaries known to operate in Soho's less reputable establishments. A bookseller in Charing Cross who trafficked in more than rare tomes. A dockside courier whose loyalty could be bought with either coin or threat. It was in the bookseller's notes, however, that Holmes's interest sharpened. There, among invoices for French novels and obscure journals, was a single slip. A receipt for a special parcel received 2 days earlier, marked only with the ciphered initials E.V. E.V., Holmes mused. Émile Vasseur alive then, or his agents still at work. He fetched his hat and coat without hesitation. Come, Watson. We must pay a visit to Mr. Fortier at Charing Cross before the trail grows cold. Time is not on our side, and our adversaries, now forewarned, will waste none. Night in London had its own energy, purposeful, elusive, sometimes menacing. We hailed a cab and rattled through the damp, narrow streets. Holmes's silhouette tense with anticipation. When we reached the bookshop, a narrow-fronted place squeezed between a tobacconist and a pawn shop. Holmes paused only long enough to scan the street before pushing open the door. The interior was warm with the scent of paper and glue. The shelves a chaos of volumes stacked in haphazard towers. Behind the counter, a stooped man with a pointed beard and clever eyes looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "Good evening, Mr. Fortier," Holmes began, voice genial but laced with command. "We require your assistance in a matter of national urgency, a parcel delivered within the past 48 hours, addressed with the initials E.V. The bookseller's expression stilled, wary. "I receive many parcels, perhaps you could be more specific, monsieur." Holmes produced the Baron's note, and the mere sight of the embassy seal seemed to hasten Fortier's decision. He nodded, ducking behind the counter and re-emerging with a flat, oilskin-wrapped bundle. "This came yesterday," Fortier whispered. "A young woman brought it, spoke little, but paid well. She said only that it must be collected by Monsieur Vasseur, or someone with the proper words." Holmes took the package, his eyes never leaving Fortier's face. "You have done your duty. If anyone else comes seeking it, you will say nothing and inform the embassy at once." We stepped out into the rain-slick street, the bundle cradled carefully in Holmes's hands. Under the nearest lamp, he examined the seal-red twine, no wax, but tied in a distinct sailor's knot. A subtle message. Mortlake's influence lingered, even in his absence. Back in Baker Street, Holmes worked quickly. He cut the twine and unfolded the oilskin, revealing a single letter, written in an elegant, compressed French script. As Holmes read aloud, the stakes already high became suddenly vertiginous. "This letter, should it be read, will destroy the balance that has been restored. It contains the names, dates, and deeds of those who trafficked secrets, French and English alike. Let the possessor beware." In these pages are enemies on all sides, and neither country will forgive the one who wields this knowledge rashly. To M, who has held the line, and to A, who may yet redeem it, decide wisely. Holmes fell silent, folding the letter with unusual care. You see, Watson, Mortlake was not only fighting for exoneration, he was holding back a storm that could have swept away more than his own reputation. I shivered, not from cold, but from the magnitude of what we held. What will you do? Holmes regarded me, and I saw the old light in his eyes, the blend of intellect, duty, and something softer. We will deliver this to Baron de Saint-Laurent. Renaud Armand will know how to wield it surgically, judiciously. If we withhold it, others will die. If we publish it, we sow chaos. He stood, the letter now secure in his breast pocket. Come, Watson. There is no triumph in these affairs, only the narrow path between ruin and salvation. We walked once more into the rain, where London's secrets pressed close, but, for a fleeting moment, found themselves in the hands of those who would not betray them. And so the case of the letter sealed with no wax reached its final reckoning not with acclaim, nor with revelation, but with the quiet, necessary passing of danger from one steady hand to another. I did not know, as we crossed the city's wet stones, what stories would fill tomorrow's headlines. But I knew, in the silent understanding that passed between Holmes and me, that some victories are not sung, but kept safe like letters never sealed, but forever guarded in the memory of those who remain vigilant. Dawn crept over London, pale and clean, washing the night's anxieties into the subdued hum of a city waking to a new day. Holmes and I, weary but resolved, returned to Baker Street after our final journey across rain-soaked pavements. The Baron de Saint-Laurent met us promptly, his carriage waiting outside, the horses steaming gently in the cool morning air. With a few quiet words and a firm handshake, Holmes entrusted the perilous letter unsealed, but wrapped with the same care its secrets deserved into the Baron's custody. The ambassador's gratitude was formal but heartfelt. His promise, delivered in the language of diplomacy, assured that the evidence would reach Renaud Armand without passing through any but the most trusted hands. Once the Baron had departed, Holmes and I stood for a time at the window, watching as the carriage disappeared into the fog-bound city. It was an ending unlike so many others, not marked by applause or headlines, but by a gentle lifting of tension, a restoration of balance achieved through careful restraint. We resumed our morning rituals. Holmes with his coffee and the newspaper, I with my pen, revisiting the day's final pages. There was no mention of Mortlake or Havelock or the perilous cipher in the columns of the Times, just the ordinary affairs of government and the slow turn of the season. It struck me as fitting. The greatest victories, I realized, were sometimes those that left the world unchanged, save for the quiet removal of a hidden danger. Holmes read in silence for a while, then set the paper aside. His gaze found mine with a rare warmth. You see, Watson, the true art of detection is not in the triumph, but in the restoration, the gentle art of making what was disturbed whole again. Mortlake's name will never grace a monument, but his courage and his sister's helped preserve a fragile peace. The true villains are unmasked or neutralized. Those who remain will move quietly into history, their schemes disrupted, their shadows dispersed. He rose, crossing to the mantel where the captain's diary lay. He ran a finger along the spine, contemplative. It is the smallest acts, an unsealed letter, a concealed cipher, the loyalty of a sister that tip the balance between ruin and redemption. It is easy, perhaps, to imagine the world as saved by grand gestures, but more often, it is preserved by the discretion of a few. I nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The images of Renthorpe House, the frightened but determined Adeline, and the steady march of hidden hands, all seemed to settle at last into their proper places. The next week saw the quiet confirmation of our work's effect. Word reached us from Lestrade. Havelock was convicted on the strength of Mortlake's diary and Holmes's testimony. No public mention was made of espionage. Instead, the record showed only murder under aggravated circumstances. The unnamed traitor in the War Office resigned abruptly, replaced by a man whose integrity, Holmes said, was less open to negotiation. Vasseur, the elusive codebreaker, vanished from London, his threat neutralized, if not entirely erased. A letter arrived from Sussex, written in a graceful hand. Miss Mortlake thanked Holmes and myself with a gratitude too deep for formality, promising to honor her brother's name in the quiet, steady way of those who have survived the world's storms. One evening, Holmes and I sat together as the first frost glazed the panes. He regarded me with a half-smile, that old, familiar glint of mischief mingling with rare contentment. "Well, Watson, you see the advantage of a letter sealed with no wax. It demands the trust of its bearer and the wisdom of its reader. It is not the seal that makes a secret safe, but the heart in which it is kept." I returned his smile, sensing the end of the tale, one not marked by thunder, but by the gentle certainty that, for now, the shadows had been held at bay. Outside, London carried on, cabs rumbling, rain falling, and lives turning on secrets too delicate for the day's news. In our sitting room, warmth and light prevailed, a testament to the silent, enduring vigilance of one consulting detective, his steadfast friend, and the fragile, unsealed trust that is, perhaps, the truest safeguard of all. Thus concluded the case of the letter sealed with no wax, a mystery not of spectacle, but of subtlety, a tale whose ending, like all that truly matters, lingered quietly in the heart long after the last page was turned.